Professor Nutbutter's House of Treats by Primus. Story written by Anonymous. His name was Professor Thomas Dowden, but we all called him Professor Nutbutter on account of he owned the local sweet shop by the same name. As kids, we all spent a great deal of time hanging about the shop, consuming as many savory treats as we could afford. Many a Saturday afternoon was spent scouring the neighborhood in search of return-for-deposit pop bottles in hopes that we could muster enough change for one of the professor's nut butter and jam sandwiches. That was the shop's specialty. Besides all the marvelous candies and whatnot, the shop had an assortment of spreads made from various nuts as well as an array of jams and jellies. One could have a sandwich made from almond butter and apricot, or perhaps a peanut butter and pineapple, or my personal favorite, cashew butter and blackberry with sliced banana. Washed down with a large glass of chocolate milk. It was quite a delightful experience for a young boy growing up in the small town of Meekleyville. I went to grade school with his son Elvin. Elvin Dowden was a smart kid. We called him Half Pint on account of he was the smartest kid in the 5th grade. Everyone liked Half Pint. Whenever it was someone's birthday, Miss Hudson, our teacher, would let us have an extra long lunch, and Half Pint would bring in all kinds of sandwiches and treats from his father's shop. Another thing that kept us all hanging around with old Half Pint was the fact that the Dowdens always had an abundance of puppies to play with. Whenever you went to the shop, you could be assured that there were at least half a dozen or so yellow lab pups scampering about. And they were all so smart, unbelievably smart, and well behaved for little fluffy pups. One day I asked, "Hey, Half Pint, how come you guys got so many pups all the time?" He said, "Well, my dad don't like dogs, only pups." Then I said, "Well, what do you do when they grow up?" And Half Pint said, "What do you mean?" As time passed, we all began to notice things. I was in 8th grade and puberty was setting in. I'd grown what seemed like a 1.5 feet in just a matter of months. But Half Pint, he was still the same. In fact, he was still the same size I always remembered him. As I was getting older, I didn't go by the sweet shop near as much, but on occasion I got a craving for nut butter sandwiches and chocolate milk. It seemed each time I went by the shop, there were fewer and fewer pups. And the ones that were there looked tired and listless. When I was 13, my family moved to Drayton. It was a good distance away from Meekleyville, but still in Barkley County. I graduated from Dooley High and went on to college at State. I didn't think much of my days in Meekleyville, until one day in my senior year. I wasn't a very good student. In actuality, if it weren't for the fact that I was the fastest guy on the swim team, I think they would have drummed me out 2 years prior. Most of my classes were novelty classes. Basket weaving 101, crafts, things like that. But I had to pass biology to graduate. My tutor was Ellen Farnsworth, known to me, and probably many others, as the cheerleader with the largest breasts. She was helping me prep for a big exam. I was listening as she read, not really hearing what she was saying as much as watching her lips and fantasizing. It wasn't until the words Professor Thomas Dowden sprang from her mouth that I was thrust back into reality. "What?" I said. She read from an old article that spoke of a college professor in the East, an entomologist, who claimed that studies done with the common inchworm could be related with some forms of dwarfism. It went on to say that experiments which stunted the growth of some half dozen or so young Labradors was considered highly irregular by the scientific community. When questioned, Professor Dowden replied, "I don't like dogs, but everyone likes puppies." When rumors of human experimentation began to circulate, the professor mysteriously disappeared, and all research in that area was halted. It wasn't until many years later that I returned to Meeklyville. It had become a bit of a tourist stop on account of it being an old logging town at the turn of the century. Spending my day wandering around reminiscing, I avoided the sweet shop more subconsciously than consciously. Of course, Professor Dowden had long since passed away. I couldn't help but take a glance at the shop as I drove out of town. And there, on the porch, sat the familiar figure of Elvin Half-Pint Dowden, looking the same as he did in Miss Hudson's 5th grade class. Only a bit more tired and listless.